I'm very excited to have both of you guys here. This is going to be an incredibly fun podcast. And it's necessary to have both of you because of your Canadian sensibilities will not allow you to brag on yourselves. So I'm just going to turn you on each other to bring out the best in each other. Is that fair? Okay. We got Robert Hayes, the CEO of Athena.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Eric. Super excited to be here.
And we got Chris Ho over here, who's the Chief Client Officer of Athena.
Thanks so much for having us.
Okay, now we're all identified. We're ready to go. I want to do quick backgrounds of you guys because I think you both have really interesting stories. And maybe Chris, since you're the instigator here, do you mind going first and telling us how you ended up as Chief Client Officer of Athena, and maybe what a Chief Client Officer does?
So, just a little bit about my background. I started my career in consulting, and pretty quickly after that, pivoted into starting my own company. And the first company that I started was with a gentleman named Julian Roger, and we started a small Canadian payroll startup. And the idea of it, or a huge part of the mission of that company, was to build a payroll system that was going to help people and help Canadians save. And we thought that doing financial literacy at the point of payroll was going to be the only way that you could actually achieve that, because you could get people's money before they got it and help them make better decisions. And so we dove into that and worked on that for a bunch of years, and had some big wins and some big losses along the way, but eventually ended up accepting an acquisition offer from a company called Humi. Humi was out of Y Combinator. It is a Canadian HR and payroll software company, very similar to Augusto or a Zenefits or a Rippling, but much smaller on the Canadian stage. And so joined that company and worked there for many years, and was absolutely loving it. And Jonathan, who's our founder of Athena here, Jonathan and Robert, wore me down over the course of many months last year, and sold me on this incredible vision, which I'll let Robert kind of go into the vision and mission of Athena, because he'll tell it better than I will. But they sold me on coming in and helping them change the world over here at Athena. So I jumped over. Been an incredible ride over the past 8 months or so. And then you asked me, what does a Chief Client Officer do? And I think that's an awesome question, because it's not necessarily a new role, but it's becoming more and more prevalent for companies, especially primarily companies that have recurring revenue business. They're trying to become more and more client-centric, right? Because, their entire business model or their entire revenue model is based on clients staying happy and continuing to do business with them. So to break it down and make it extremely clear, there's two sides to what a Chief Client Officer does, or what, a head of client would do at a company. There's the hard side and the soft side. On the hard side, really what you you're a steward of a portfolio of annuities, right? Because every recurring revenue business has annuities, and that's how their business runs. That's how they operate. An annuity, for those that don't know, is literally just any amount of money that recurs. It's supposed to be on an annual basis. For us, it's on a monthly basis. And so, there's a lot of financial instruments that are annuities. And just like at a company, your revenue model could be recurring revenue on a monthly or an annual basis. But the hard side responsibility, and the only responsibility of a Chief Client Officer, is to make sure that the expected value of those annuities is growing rather than shrinking. And so, that's the hard side of it, right? Every month, every single month for us, our annuities or our recurring revenue has a chance of recurring or expanding or contracting or stopping entirely, right? And so what we do is we run programs and create a client service environment or a client experience that help those recurring revenue or those recurring revenue amounts expand or continue, as opposed to contract or stop. And building a world-class client program is all about building those systems and processes that expand and increase the expected value of that client portfolio. Now, the soft side of it is that it's an entirely people-centric role. And you have to be desperately passionate about providing a really good client experience and making people happy and making people feel like they are something different than what they would be without your service. And one of the coolest analogies that I heard, that I've seen, and I will have to find out who said this because it wasn't my own idea, and I just don't remember what the source is, but someone once told me that, yeah, it's just my...
It is now.
Someone once told me that, great client service is, giving people medicine for their pain and candy for their soul. And so you're trying to give people medicine that tastes like candy, so they feel, they feel good and smile all while you're actually solving their problems. Because a lot of companies either do one or the other, right? They can solve your problems, and it sucks to work with them, just like our telco, right? Our telecom services, they're actually it's an amazing service, right? If you think about it, but everyone fucking hates them. It's because there's no candy side to it. And then of course, I'm sure you've run into a lot of, especially startup companies, where they're really nice and they're trying their hardest, but you can't work with them because there's no medicine there, right? They're not solving any pain. So that's the role that I run here at Athena.
I like that structure a lot. And I'm interested to dig into that in the context of Athena once we kind of set that stage too. But Robert, let's do your kind of background story. What was your road into Athena?
I started up in probably the most unsexy industry in the whole world, which is call centers and outsourcing. And so a few years ago, I won't date myself, when it was fashionable to do so, Americans used to outsource to Canada a lot. And then that's when I first got tied up into the outsourcing industry. Ended up as a young man in a company and learning that space and going, hey, this job is pretty cool. You get to learn leadership at a very young age. So I had my first team of 25 people working for me at the age of 22. And it gave me just a tremendous opportunity to kind of not only get deep experience with leadership, but kind of grow that as time went on. Years later, I ended up in the Philippines. My company sent me out there to actually build a location in the Philippines. And that was in 2008. And that was my first introduction to kind of offshoring in the sense of heading overseas. And so I spent quite a few years there, about 5 years at that company, really learning how to set up and establish buildings, how to work with local government units, how to deal with tax treaties and all sorts of fun stuff. And as a young man, it was, kind of get smashed with a sack of hammers to some degree. And so I learned everything from different cultures to, different leadership skills as I did it. And as when you do that, what I found was I got really disgruntled with kind of typical leadership and typical business in the outsourcing space. So I got frustrated with kind of very old, kind of 1980s leadership tactics that were constantly being used, especially overseas. Cutting costs quarter to quarter, that type of thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, what does that imply? The 80s, is that kind of a rank and yank, very top down sort of?
You see it. Performance management practices is probably the easiest, but there's obviously many, many different things. But you have 3 chances and you're gone, right? Oh, wait a minute, our quarterly EBITDA dropped by 2%. We're riffing, 150 people tomorrow, right? That type of thing, right? And then every single time you turn around, just cutting costs on things that just have a ripple effect to the employee population and to the way that the business operates. And so I was stunned kind of at the end of that journey because my program, so I would have, at the end of it, I had about 5,000 people working for me. And what I found was I was the most profitable by far, yet I was the person who also spent a lot, didn't engage in a lot of those practices. And I just became, I guess, a little disgruntled with the fact that I didn't think that those organizations had it in them to change. And so that's when I started looking for a company that would embody that spirit, would be willing to have that change, would take a risk. And that's when I stumbled across TaskUs, where I decided to take a little bit of a wild jump at the time. Now it looks like a very good decision, but back then it was a new company. They were starting out. The founders were 2 really good guys. And I just believed them and knew that they cared and that they wanted to make a difference. And so I was able to take my skill in the industry, the leadership experience I had over those years, and to jump into TaskUs, and had a very, very positive run with them, trying to change the way we treat people, change the way we do performance management, build really nice offices, right? And we saw a lot of attraction from a lot of great technical companies. A lot of very popular tech companies joined with TaskUs over the years after that. And it got to a size and scale where I felt like it wasn't quite for me anymore. I still dearly love the company, still really love the founders. I think they're still doing great things, but you just reach that point where you think I'd be better off taking risks or, in something a little bit of a smaller scale. And so I decided to take a break. I told my wife at the time, should I retire? What should I do? And of course, I get introduced to Jonathan through a friend, and me and him start talking about this little company that he accidentally started called Athena. And it was accidentally started for probably the most admirable reason, which sold me on the company in the first place, which was because he wanted to save people's jobs. And so there was a layoff that took place at another company, and that layoff affected these folks because they were going from, believe it or not, from a remote work environment back into the office. This is pre-COVID. And he wanted to save their jobs. And so I just always had an affinity for that type of leadership. And so that's why me and him really hit it off, and decided to start this thing called Athena and really get it going. And so I'm sure we'll dive into more of what Athena's doing today, what we stand for, and what our mission is. But that's kind of the journey that got me here.
Yeah, I like it. And we encounter our first battle with humility, because you did not mention the scale that TaskUs reached, which was pretty incredible. I think you said somewhere on the order of 30,000.
When I left, I had about
employees.
20,000 people in my organization. I think now they're probably 40,000. So I think their earnings call was just the other day. I didn't look too much in detail, but yeah, they're a very large and successful company, and continuing to be even more successful. But yeah, when I decided to move on, I had about 20,000 people in the organization. I was the chief operating officer, so I had operations, data science, project management, facilities, all within my purview.
And the clients in that context are mostly larger organizations, so not a consumer brand, but a ton of employees. I think pretty well known within the Philippines for just being such a large employer.
Really strong Glassdoor ratings, some of the best in the industry. We pioneered a lot of different employee benefits, which now seem commonplace, but at the time were unheard of, right? So a lot of those companies, like a lot of our competitors, like I said, I've been to a lot of call centers in my life, and you would see really old, dusty, unclean, kind of shops. And we pioneered just, daycares in the facility, right? Retirement plans. We pioneered just all kinds of different benefits for like LGBTQ support, for common law partners with HMO, which, especially overseas, a lot of these practices were not normal. And so, we launched a lot of those things over the years to just really build that bond, and show that, we're taking care of people, right? And that it's very possible to be very successful and make a lot of money at the same time. So.
Yeah, I mean, with the long run orientation, they're damn near the same thing, but a lot of people don't think that way. So, Robert, what was it about Chris that made you so persistent in your recruiting efforts? He feels like he was still kind of swooned and pursued. I'm not sure what the right verb is there, but I know it was an extended thing, and it's clear to me that Chris is wonderful. But I'm curious what was the profile, or what was the role, or why you're so determined to work together.
Interviews are a really tricky thing. And I think a lot of people, there's a magic question or a magic answer, or, some sort of magic thing that you can do to do interviews better than anybody else. I've thought about it long and hard and tried to give advice many times. And I think there's just two things that it comes down to. It comes down to passions and insecurities. And if you understand passions, then you can better understand insecurities of people. And everybody has right? Everybody has both of them. But if you can't understand the passions and insecurities, you're getting a false representation of who the person is, which is a liability when it comes to the hiring process. And so I would just say probably the thing that stood out to Chris the most was that just like a deep, clear passion and just excitement for what he wants to get done, right? And so when you do that, when you find out what that passion is, then you go, oh, okay, I understand who this person is. I know that the passion is going to be there. I know what they want to accomplish with their life, where they want to go, right? And when you pour into these things, you know, oftentimes you can see the depth of somebody's passion, right? I use this as an example quite often where I say to people, like, if you get an interview and somebody's a huge Pokemon card collector, it's actually very relevant to the process because you can understand the depth to which the passion for Pokemon cards goes, right? And if they start pulling out spreadsheets of Pokemon card collections and like they've got them graded and they understand the code, you know what I mean? Like that's a really positive thing because then you understand a lot more about that person, what they're capable of and what gets them excited for life. And so I think, you know, come back to Chris, all that stood out. He pulled out some spreadsheets. I won't say what they're about, but he certainly showed a lot of passion through the process. And I think it just got us excited that a couple of passionate people together could just accomplish really, really great things.
Yeah, I see that. Chris and I have spent a few hours just like excitedly yelling to each other about big problems and technologies to solve in the world. And I don't know, I really like the model of kind of interviewing for intensity. Like, it doesn't matter what the interest is, but like if you are capable of intense interest and passion about a thing, then like you'll probably be good at whatever it is we aim you at if you care about what we aim you at, right? And I know I don't know if I can say what the spreadsheets were about. Like, only you have seen the spreadsheets, but I know that I had a similar experience of being like, hey, do you play board games? And Chris was like, yeah, I really like board games. And I was like, oh, which ones do you play? He's like, oh, I play a couple of these. And then like 9 questions later, we find out that he's like a world champion in like multiple world or worker placement games or something like that. It was, I was like, oh, depth of intensity and interest. Like, oh yeah, all right. In which now we sound like, you know, Chris Sacca is saying like, of course Travis Kalanick was going to make Uber work. He's really good at Wii bowling or whatever it was. Just like a real story that he told, which maybe fits the model. Chris, in one of our numerous conversations, I feel like before you like pitched me on Robert before I got to meet Robert. And you were like, this dude is an operator, and just like underlined verbally operator a few times. And like, what is it that kind of, what distinguishes him from other people that you've worked with that makes him more effective or more high impact or more exciting to kind of build a company like this with?
Yeah, over a long run? I think it's the combination of Robert being an operator and a leader that is so impressive, because I think people will sometimes have one without the other. I think it's, you know, people can imagine their own archetypes of what a leader would look like versus an operator, and being able to meld those together is just so rare, I think, because you need to be able to zoom in and zoom out appropriately. I actually find that the hardest thing to do in my own career, like my own leap that I take, you know, managing a bigger latitude, right? When you manage a wider scope, you have to zoom out because you need to have a good understanding of what's going on around you. And then you also have to zoom in and be micro sometimes to make sure that you don't let some of the smaller things slip through the cracks. And I've just never seen anyone in my entire life be better at that than Robert. And I think that a lot of that comes with just like the horsepower, but B, you know, running a 20,000 person org and kind of getting the pattern recognition in, right, of what is important to look at versus not. And it's funny because, you know, Robert and I are both strong-willed in different ways, and we don't always agree. And I will say this to his credit is like my
both smirking.
Like, you know, if there was some like magical scoreboard that, you know, every time in your life you got into a disagreement with someone, you had a scoreboard. I feel like I'm like, you know, I win against almost everyone that I know. And you know, I say that not humbly for a moment, because I feel like I'm usually right about stuff, and I'm just like losing by a million miles to Robert. Like, it feels like every time we get into a disagreement about something, he ends up being like very right. And it's really, really cool because then there's this huge amount of trust that gets built up around that too, because you see the deep, deep experience around what we should be focused on. And then just being relentless on keeping everyone focused and keeping everyone down, the right path, while making people feel like it's important, and while making people feel like, they have something to do with it, which I think is a huge part of it, right?
See, here's the thing though, Eric. I don't even know we're in disagreements. That's how good of a CCO he is, right? Like, I didn't even know there was a disagreement. He's got the scoreboard going, and it's invisible to me.
Just, it's...
He's got a spreadsheet of it. He's... That's that client service instinct. You didn't even know. You were in trouble. No, Chris, I've had that feeling where I'm just like, whether it's an hour later or a year later, just being like, oh, thank God he's the CEO or she's the CEO. Like, they have such better context for that decision that I felt like I had high conviction on, but you just have the reps or the perspective or, and Robert, you've been in this industry for your whole career, in a high intensity way. So it really kind of pays off, I think, instinctually or not, to see something like this grow.
There really is an art, I think, to leadership. And I think watching a lot of things, like sometimes I think Chris gets the most done when I start to tell him stories of stuff that we've dealt with before. So that it's always funny to hear him like, hey, I've got a crazy one for you. And I'm like, that's not crazy. Try again. Right. And so it's just leadership, and people are, I just think are very diverse. Right. And so there's so many examples that you get to see and so many mistakes that you get to make. And I mean, like that's why I say I was very fortunate to be in the industry I was in, because although it was very unsexy, not a lot of people wanted to be in it. It was, kind of frowned upon. It just gave me tremendous leadership experience at a very young age, which allowed me to kind of advance down that path very, very quickly. Right. So, you name what the specific employee issue is, I have seen it probably a couple times, right? And so it seems like gut instinct, but it's almost like more just pattern recognition, right? So
yeah, it seems like that was a huge asset to the stunning speed of Athena for the last year or so. Like, has it been about a year?
Middle April, yeah.
Just over a year now. Okay. So will you take us through kind of your first year and like where Athena was at when you joined, and kind of
sure.
catch us up through today?
So about a year ago, me and Jonathan sat down and said, like, what do we want this thing to be? Where do we want to go? Right. And scale and scope, was something that he was very interested in. And I mean, that's kind of my forte. So we sat down, we kind of built out a model, right? So we first sat down and agreed. And I've worked with a lot of founders over the years. The second thing we had to do was sit down and talk about rules of engagement, how we're going to work together, where ownership lays within the business, who gets input on what, right? Because, oftentimes when you're working with founders and you're building a business, a lot of confrontation can pop up, right? So you need kind of that foundation of trust and that relationship kind of set clearly at the beginning. I've done a lot of that over my life, and I much prefer to have the rules of engagement there so that we both understand the expectations of each other. And so, built the map, built the rules of engagement, and then it's time to get going, right? So, sorry, go ahead.
So before we do that, I feel like it's possible that I skipped a step, since we obviously know what Athena is, but maybe like, to the uninitiated, how would you describe Athena, and what was sort of the pitch, I guess, that brought you into the company, to even like sort of entertain talking with Jonathan? And
I mentioned the common values first, right? Because that's always very important for me. Both of us have been kind of through big growth stories of successful companies, so I think first off, getting common values is actually kind of difficult. And so, why he started the company, I think that spoke to his values. We got our families together, right? So my wife and kids, his wife and kids, right? And we just say, is this something that can stand the test of time, right? So we built a relationship that way, spent a little bit of time together. And then, kind of sat down and talked about shared visions, and that kind of primed us. Now, the shared vision itself specifically was, Jonathan had set up a shop with Thumbtack, which is what ultimately became kind of this fledgling Athena group. And there was about 80 people that he had kind of in this company that he'd saved their jobs. And so when he spoke to me, he goes, Robert, there's this absolutely massively untapped market, which is people who desperately want work. And then there's this large group of people who are out there who desperately need work. They need, advanced delegation techniques. There's so much possibility. There's so much market here that's completely untapped. All my friends love it. All the employees really love it. Like, if we could put some sort of structure to this, this could be something extremely special. And so Jonathan's very excited about a lot of the advanced delegation practices that he had come up with, or that some of his peers had come up with. And he was basically networking through those groups going, look at all of this that is possible if we can just get this machine built properly. And then my excitement to pair with it really comes from the fact that when I was a young executive, I started with an EA, and I thought there's no way I need an EA, because my workhorse level, like, I was one of those guys that would work 20-hour days, 6 days a week. Like, I would burn the candle at both ends, right? And there was a big presentation to a large Fortune 500 company, and I got some help from somebody. It wasn't my EA, it was somebody else's EA. And they did an absolutely fantastic job, and they basically, turned this presentation around for me in no time. And I remember at that moment going, damn, how stubborn am I? And I think a lot of executives go through that, right? Where they think that if you're young and you're just really going after a successful life and you're trying to build it, you think you can always do it best. And delegation basically just results in failure. And so when me and Jonathan first started talking about those kind of advanced, excited stuff, my mind as an operator went back to that time for me when I first dove into delegation. And I thought, wow, even if the advanced delegation techniques are not quite there yet, there is certainly a huge market of guys who were or girls or whoever were in the same position where I was, right? Where I was stubborn, where I was not willing to accept help. Wouldn't it be great if we could be that company that could help folks, right? And so that was kind of the primary. And then on the back end, I think I've been so fortunate that continuing to give jobs to people throughout my career is probably one of the things I'm the absolute proudest of. And not only jobs to people, but jobs to people who really, really desperately need it. And there's a moment in my life that always stands out for me, because I lived in the Philippines for 10 years. And this is at my 2 companies ago. I used to drive and I used to work graveyard shifts for the first 6 years that I was there. And I would drive down the street at 7 p.m. Going to work. And I had a young child at the time, two years old. And I would drive to work, and there would be this one child on the side of the street with just an adult T-shirt on, basically going from car to car begging, right? And it's a terrible, terrible thing to like see that kind of poverty on a day-to-day basis. I mean, it breaks your heart that that's the way the world truly is. But especially when you've got your own kid at home to compare, right? But what I would say is, folks over there desperately need the help. When they get the jobs, they can pay to get out of that poverty. And I just saw the difference that our companies, even the companies that weren't the best, were making over there by giving jobs. And so part of my passion to continue to keep putting in the hours, to keep working, really does stem from the fact that I think if there's companies that behave well, and that go to those places and see it as a tremendous opportunity to set the tone and take care of people at the same time as delivering excellent service to the clients, I just think it's an extremely positive thing to accomplish, and it's a moment of it's a very big motivating factor, I think, for me overall to continue.
Yeah, I like that a lot, and that feels similarly, and it makes it difficult to empathize sometimes with the people who seem to think there's some inherent moral problem with employing someone outside your native country. like that seems like illogical and somewhat insane to me. And I try to empathize with that view sometimes. But it's, especially in this context, when you think about how much of an impact you can have, by bringing some of the, well-developed practices and perks, and it is like I feel like sometimes arbitrage has a negative connotation. It's like very positive arbitrage. Like you can have a significant impact as an average person by contributing in the Philippines and hiring someone there or in a place like
the Philippines. I mean, I think the Philippines is there's certain things about the Philippines that make it a great place to be. I mean, there's a lot of other logistical components that I think make the Philippines great. But I just think going to economically disenfranchised locations, I mean, that's one of the most beautiful things about technology these days, right? I mean, now we can reach out and get the best of the best, right? Of people from any region, right? And so it's really interesting. I think if you have the top 10% of people in the US are just amazingly talented, high IQ, just passionate, all this, right? In my opinion, the same exists in every single country. But when you come to a country like the US, it's extremely competitive to get that level of talent, right? And so whatever arena you enter into, some of that talent is sitting there with no job, right? In some of those markets.
Yeah.
And so it just makes so much sense that if you want that top tier talent, why not go to somewhere where that talent is sitting there not doing anything, right? And so I don't think, from my experience in the different countries, and when I was with Taskus, we worked with India and Greece and Ireland and Mexico and all over. And I kind of see the same thing, that there can be cultural nuances that can make some things difficult. But for the most part, there's like extremely skilled people waiting for the opportunity. And, the Philippines is a great place, but there's lots of other places that are equally excellent.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Chris, maybe what was it for you that drew you in? Was it Jonathan, and you had a similar alignment? Was it knowing that Robert was going to kind of head this thing up? And at what point in the past year or so, in Robert's reign, did you join?
I joined in September. I think my start date was September 6th. And I mean, I think throughout the interview process and throughout the process of these two guys coming to bring me into the fold, I was really, really excited about a couple of different things. The first is that I think you have to work at a company like Athena, and we touched on it, right? We're connecting people around the world, which I think is really, really powerful. And I think some of the things that you have to believe is that you have to believe that, like Robert said, people all around the world are more or less equal, right? That there aren't certain parts of the world that are inherently better or smarter than other places in the world. I think you have to also believe that worldwide talent is going to continue to get harder to find rather than easier. And I think there's actually like that sounds, when someone just says it like that, it's easy to nod and agree, but there's a whole contingent of people that would think that talent is going to get easier to find, right? Because there's going to be unemployment from AI and machine learning and all that kind of stuff. And so I'm firmly in the camp that talent and good talent is going to continually get more and more competitive. And then I think that the other thing that you have to believe is that, like I said, we're connecting the world, and that people are no one place is better than the others. You have to believe that people around the world can actually work together. And you use the term arbitrage, and I don't want to explore that too deeply necessarily, but what I do want to talk a little bit about is the fact that I think there are some people that have this notion that when you work with someone across the world, you're taking advantage of them in some way, shape, or form, right? And
there seem to be some people now who just equate the word hire with the word exploit, which just is not, those words are not the same
and
word.
I'm fully with you. And I think that what Robert and Jonathan's vision and what they were describing to me was so beautiful to me. And I don't say that lightly, or I'm not trying to make it like dramatized or anything like that. It was a big decision for me to come and join up. And it was truly beautiful to me that, what they described to me was, we're going to connect these incredible people across the world. We're going to connect some of the best and brightest in the Philippines and, perhaps other nations as well with some of the best and brightest principals or executives, some people that are like making legitimate change all around the world. We're going to connect them together. We're going to give people, a good sense of how small the world can be. And we're going to teach these people, but the clients and the EAs, how to use their time better and how to, do more together. Like do more together. Like it's actually so crazy if you just think about it like that, right? But you can get everyone together in such a way that it's really, really beautiful because you're changing two lives at once, and it can be very transformative. So it's just so exciting for me.
Yeah. The closer I have gotten to it and the bigger my sort of sample size has gotten, I know my experience with Athena has been great. I know my EA is wonderful and like very grateful for the opportunity and is like learning and excited. But meeting hundreds of other EAs and seeing that broadly has like given me a similar to you're describing, like a deep sense of the beauty of the win-win that you guys are facilitating here, which I think is incredibly cool. And they're so, and maybe I hope that's what we can kind of get into now, like maybe in the context of the exciting past year you guys have had, but like everything that goes into creating a great experience on both sides, right? For your clients and for EAs. It's a lot more than, I feel like the simplified look is like, oh, it's a staffing company. Like you make a match, and there is just so much more that goes into both sides of this and all the kind of magic in the middle that I'm sure, and I know you have seen firsthand all of the work that you guys have put into that.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot. And I think it's important to start with, when you first say, just hiring somebody, right? First off, that's a difficult process on its own, right? But certainly that is fairly common. There's also the method, which I think is an interesting thing. Even having a one-to-one relationship or assigning a person to another person or making that match, that's not something that I think the industry necessarily agrees on, right? So one of the things the industry I think agrees on is you take a task, you send it somewhere, right? It gets done, it comes back, right? That's kind of the fundamental agreement of the industry today. And one thing that Athena, I think, has decided is that the relationship and the expectations matter a lot, right? If you don't have that relationship built, those expectations haven't been set over time, if that communication tone is not set correctly, that a lot can be missed. And so I think one of the first things we've done is we said, no, this is the way to do it. And so we've made that kind of clear that, it's going to be rocky. There's going to be some mismatches up early, right? It's going to be, there's going to be a learning phase, as I'm sure you had with your EA, Eric. But it's fundamental to go through that behavior change, because otherwise you can't get to this kind of elite level of delegation where you have teams and practices and expectations being continually met. And so I think, first off, of all the other organizations we've seen, that's not very common that they're that firm on that. And it's not very common that this is a personal and professional relationship. This isn't just rudimentary tasks or calendar management, that it's a collection of different things with a quest to kind of like amplify yourself over a longer period of time. That's the premise of the start for Athena. So I don't know if I articulated that great. Chris is probably better with the words, but I do think that that's an important part to call out, because I don't see a lot of people, especially who are overseas, working that way. I've seen, onshore folks, companies doing some of that, but very, very few offshore. More often than not, they either charge per hour or per task, and the relationship doesn't stay consistent for a long period of time.
That's one of the interesting hard stances as a brand and a service that I feel like Athena took, which is like, we are full-time, long-term matches only. And I actually kind of dug in on that at first. I was kind of like, I don't think I need a full-time person. Like I can probably get away with 10 hours a week. And it was you are so correct to hold that line. Because as soon as I got matched and got in there, it totally changed my thinking from how little help can I get away with to how do I maximally use this incredible new resource that I have? What else can I do or give them or delegate that really like totally changed the frame for me. And I think I'm sure it is a simpler and better business to run, but it is also like a much stronger service from my point of view as a client because of that decision.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because it's such a hard line in the sand to draw. A lot of people, it's funny, it's even our client base, as you might be able to tell, because it's still an expensive service, right? Is the relatively wealthy people potentially that are further along in their careers. There's also a lot of founders in the technology space. And yet still there's a lot of there's still a real tentative nature around getting an executive assistant. There's a lot of people that are bashful about it. There are a lot of people that are, wonder, maybe it's not necessarily, do I deserve this, but like, I don't necessarily need this because, I can do some of this stuff myself. And it's interesting. You see all these different types of profiles of clients that are really, really tentative, just like you yourself were, Eric. And one of the things that, I like to tease some of our clients about it, because, if they say they don't have enough stuff to do, I'm just like, it just can't be true. Either that or like, I don't know. I don't know what kind of startup you're running, but it's definitely not like the one I was running. If you don't have enough stuff to, to give to your,
Come on, Chris, you have a word for them.
I do. I call them junior varsity. I've called it to a couple of them to their faces too. It's
There's like a mental block where I'm like, I'm so busy. Oh, I don't know. I don't have enough work to give an EA. Or I don't know how I would use this new resource, which is like, that is a mental block.
It's a big mental block. And it is funny when I do, I say that that's junior varsity, buddy. And it's good to challenge those guys because they take a moment. It's interesting actually, because they'll take a moment and they'll say, I guess you're right? I do have tons of stuff to do. And there's actually also with clients, while we're talking about the psychology of their different profiles, we do find that women have a much harder time, thinking that they deserve an executive assistant, which is also really, really interesting. A lot of them think, hey, I don't really need it, or, I can do that myself. And, there's a different type of coaching that goes in around that because a lot of what we're doing in onboarding is we're priming people for a behavior change. Right. And I think we've come so far, but we have so far to come, in onboarding and getting people ready for this relationship, because, a relationship with your executive assistant it's the most personal professional relationship you'll ever have. I think if you were to interview a bunch of like old dudes or, like really seasoned executives, instead of old dudes, we'll say seasoned executives, that have these long-term relationships with their executive assistants. A lot of them, their closest relationships from a personal level will be with their spouses, whether it's their wife or their husband, and with their executive assistants. Right. A lot of what you do, or a lot of what your executive assistant takes from you as well, is a lot of the daily administration of your life. And a lot of the daily administration of your life is the daily rhythm of your life, right? If you ask a lot of people, how do you start your day? They get up, they have a shower, they have a coffee, maybe they exercise, they sit down and they check their email. But if you have a really strong executive assistant, you're not checking your email anymore, right? You might not necessarily be booking, you lose a lot of agency in booking your calendar in, you lose a lot of agency in how you respond to certain things and what you see. And it's so interesting to prime people for that change, because it is very disconcerting for a lot of people. I see Robert smirking, so
well, it just occurred to me, Chris. Do you remember a few years ago, Steve Jobs and these guys were all like wearing the same clothes every day because they wanted to make less decisions every single day, right? So it got to that point where it's like the same outfit. That is an acceptable practice, right? But an EA is still such a big barrier, right? Like it's really interesting, like that was a more acceptable change to literally wear the same thing every day on repeat, right? Than to actually get help from somebody, right? But I think it does come back to, if you don't think that the person receiving the task actually wants it, then you automatically hesitate to deliver in the first place, right? Like you seem, like that asshole boss or something from a TV show. But when you start to realize that their life gets so much better, they gain experience, they're learning new things, it's changing the way they think about the world, it's helping their economic circumstance, right? Like, I mean, I think there's just a superpower there because it's a two-way thing. And, you know, I'll say just over my career, I've had a chance to work with a lot of people where, you know, they do amazing work, and then the economic benefits that come from some of these relationships. I mean, Chris, you have probably the most stories there. But those always really shine to me, that when, you know, they get tipped in crypto, or, you know, like they do such an amazing job to help with an investment. I mean, like, you know, that they get a piece, right? I mean, we have so many of those really cool stories that I think fly in the face of that kind of initial hesitation, which makes it, I think, for me and you especially, so surreal to imagine people still hesitating to take that first jump, right?
It's
give us some stories,
I mean,
Chris.
I'll give you some specifics. I suppose I think that I have seen, and I remember, right, I've been here for about 8 months, so still getting my feet wet to a large extent, and I have seen some of our executive assistants' lives entirely change. The lives for themselves and for their families entirely change because they have had the opportunity to essentially become the right-hand person, right? The right-hand person to some of the most up-and-coming, essentially leaders of the world, right? I mean, maybe that's a little bit of a dramatization, but it's not really. Right, our client base is quite affluent. Our client base is quite powerful, and there are people that are building the next unicorns. You know, tons. We have plenty of clients that are at these unicorns. We have plenty of clients that are, you know, essentially building the technology of tomorrow, or, you know, running industries that affect our everyday lives. And our executive assistants, they get to be that person's right-hand person. Right. And really, I mean, literally in the 8 months that I've been here, I've seen on multiple occasions lives being completely changed from an economic standpoint, because of something that the client has provided to that executive assistant, whether it be direct compensation or equity or some opportunity to come lead a team. And it has been, it's honestly, like, every time I hear about it, it makes me want to work harder here.
Yeah. It's almost like, it feels like every month now, where a client is asking for their EA to be flown to another country, Mexico or the US, or go to a board meeting here, right? Or join the team get together, right? In this place, or, you know, that EA, you know, starts to get involved with some of the advanced executive level hiring, right? It's pretty amazing stuff. But I'll say the one that kind of surprised me the most, and Chris probably doesn't like that I'm telling stories, but I'll tell him anyways. Is one of the A's, I meet with them every week, and she was telling me that one of her primary responsibilities, believe it or not, is to maintain a family Slack room where she helps the family stay bonded over distances by, like, getting them to ask about their day, or, like, you know, booking next dinners, right? Like, she'll do things like, there's family questions of the day that everybody has to answer, right? So the EA is actually like a center point in that family, to kind of keep them bonded, right? And actually feels like they are part of the family because they're such a central component, right? And it's just things that you just wouldn't, you're so surprised, right? That those type of relationships are in place. And then it makes you reflect on your own family relationships, right? And go, wait a minute, you know, if I'm growing away from my mom or dad because they live on the other coast, right, or something like that, would a practice like that kind of help us stay tighter and more bonded as a family, right? So, and that's why, going back to the junior varsity comment, it gets, when you hear that, like, oh, I don't have enough to delegate, or you hear things like, you know, I just do the Amazon myself, right? You start to go like, you know, okay, but what opportunity is being left on the table? Either opportunity to expand your output, right? To be able to do more, to achieve more, to hit your goals faster, right? Or the ability to achieve the same and relax way more, have way more time to yourself, right? Spend more time on the beach, right? Like, you know, and different people have different ambitions, but Those are probably the two most common, right? Which is I want to achieve the same, but hang out and relax and enjoy my life, or I want to superpower myself and 10x my output. So I've got 3 jobs and, I've hit my bucket list before the age of 45.
This is why this is the right podcast, because that is literally an entire commercial for thinking in leverage without using the word but Athena has like leverage in your tagline, or at least you used to. Like the homepage was like giving leverage to the world, or like what is like either your personal or kind of like the organization's take on that? I mean, do you talk about that openly? Do you like think about it intentionally?
We've thrown this back and forth, and we're a startup company, and we're the nomenclature is always so tough, right? We're trying to embody this feeling, right, that we're trying to achieve, right?
Yep.
And so right now we're really focused on basically time. Like time is the one resource that is not scalable, right? Time is the resource that you have a very finite supply of, and that every moment of every day that you spend, right, that's a decision that you are making that you cannot take back and that you can't exchange, right? And so, for us, if you spend even 15 minutes a day for your entire life on just purchasing Amazon products, that's a pretty bad decision when it comes to your overall your time. Exactly.
Yeah, what's your hourly rate?
And then but here's the interesting part that I think a lot of people need to think about, and I think Chris really hits on this well, is if it takes you 2 hours to delegate that task, right? But it's gone forever, right? Then you got to start measuring that. But what usually happens is people do it for an hour, the EA fails or the process fails for some reason, and I'll just do it. So they spend the hour and then they go right back to doing the 15 minutes immediately after, instead of finishing that 2-hour investment to get it trained properly and communicated properly and delegated forever. And so it's that first 2-hour component when it comes to leverage that I think is probably the biggest challenge that our business faces, but that really any executive faces.
I think Robert hit on it exactly, and there's two. There's actually kind of three points I just want to hit on to give you that piece on that piece on leverage points, that you're Chris. Looking for the pod. But really, I mean, one of the coolest things for me. So I've been working with Sam for 8 months, and Sam is my EA. She's wonderful.
Sam is your EA.
And one of the really cool things that she's been great at and that I love is that it's really for the last 7 months or so about 1 month in, what I did is I essentially put together a list of all the important people in my life, gave her access to my Facebook and Instagram, and kind of went through and just, categorized the people that I might want to send gifts to for certain events and all that kind of stuff. And it is so cool because it's gotten to the point where there's like essentially some like things that, there's like a baby book that I really like to send to people that have just are having a kid, or something like, for weddings or something for birthdays. And you kind of go and classify who's acceptable to get to what. And it is so cool because now people think that I'm more thoughtful than I am. Honestly, right? Like, it's like, I got this note from a buddy the other day saying like, oh my God, this book is so cool. Like, I really appreciate it. Like, me and, his name's Kevin, me and Yana love it. Thank you so much. And funny enough, and like, this is going to sound terrible, but like, I actually didn't know that he had a kid. But I had sent him a gift. Right. And now I have this superpower, which is crazy. And I texted him and was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And, we caught up and all that kind of stuff. But, so Sam is taking care of that and that's the definition of leverage, right? Like I am potentially
that's awesome.
Some people might say that's cheating and you should really know.
You're doing things you didn't even know you were doing.
Like that's part of the SOP, right? The other part that I wanted to circle back on, because Robert's family story really resonated with me, because one of the coolest stories that I heard was from a client who, we won't talk about what the client's name is, but he came to me, and this was back when I had pretty much first started, because I was running his kickoff call and his discovery call, and I was kicking him off with an executive assistant, and one of the things that he had said in his goals was, I want to spend more time with my wife and my 2 daughters. I'm putting all my time and energy into this startup. It's going great, but I do feel really guilty that I'm not spending enough time with them, and I feel like a lot of regret that I'm missing some of their stuff. And so they were like, perfect. The EA said, okay, I'm going to make sure some of this stuff gets booked in. And really, actually, what ended up happening is we come back about a month later, and I wasn't in this particular call, but he messaged me and he said, I just got called out by my EA. My EA told me I was being a dick. And I said, what? And so he tells me the story, and he goes, yeah, over the course of the first month, she had booked a bunch of stuff for me with my wife and kids, and I had, canceled some of the things, and I had to, literally, it was like the prototypical story. Like, he had missed the soccer game, literally, of like his two daughters are on the same team. They're playing a soccer thing, and he said he was going to go, and he didn't, and his EA called him out. And I loved that story so much. And his EA said, stop being a dick and like pay attention to your family, like get your priorities in order. And one of the things that is you have to remember, right, is that the executive assistant and client relationship is super, super tough for the EA, because there's a huge socioeconomic difference. There's a huge seniority difference. There's like big gaps, right, in terms of the level of sophistication that the client may have versus what the EA may have. Because an EA, no matter how wonderful they are, and no matter how well we, source and train and all that kind of stuff, they're still junior resources, right? Which is part of it's part of the battle, and part of why onboarding can be really challenging, right? Because you're taking this junior resource and you're putting them into a different world, and they're trying to emulate the person, and they're trying to be responsible for them, and be this, bastion of hope, essentially. And this,
trying to represent them in a culture that they don't totally understand.
100%.
Like, that's a
and
really
so
hard
when
challenge.
I heard that this EA was holding him accountable to his actions, I was like blown away, and I was so happy, because one of the things, and now like I'm getting into my 8th month with Sam here. Sam holds me accountable to stuff, and like scolds me for doing stuff, that I'm not supposed to do, or, holds me accountable to. And when you have an accountability partner that knows and understands your context, and when your EA can be your accountability partner, that is extremely powerful, and something that we're trying to drive towards as well. So having someone hold you accountable to your own progress, both personally and professionally, that's a superpower in and of itself, right?
Yeah, I have that relationship with Ivan even in very subtle ways. I mean, he just says, hey, you said you wanted to write a blog post every week. Do you have a blog post ready this week? And it's like the politest reminder that I'm not living up to my past self's expectations ever. And I'm like, oh yeah, all right. Here I go. Thank you for the reminder. But yeah. I feel like we could do, I could spend hours digging through your guys' brain and experience for this, and I kind of want to, because I feel like that will just be an entire amazing podcast unto itself. I have an inexhaustible appetite for out-of-the-box tasks and just like great stories of delegation, like whether it's really impressive or really small, or like this accountability story is amazing, this family group chat is amazing, like some of these advanced delegation like tactics, I guess, that you guys talk about. And I mean, to me, one of the most compelling things about Athena is the community of EAs and the playbooks that get generated, and the techniques and everything that they are either learning independently and then sharing, or that you are like training them even before we get matched, like tools and playbooks and techniques. All of that is so exciting. And every like kind of little case study that I hear is like just more brain candy for me.
You want to take it, Chris, or you want me to dive into that onboarding process? Oh yeah.
I want you both to take it. Both hold hands, dive in, synchronized platform, 30 meter.
I'll kick it off, and I'll throw it over to Chris for the learning space, where he's a little bit more in the weeds than me. But from a recruiting process, we look for the factors that best match what we expect our executives to expect, right? So we're trying to understand our demographic, which is why we're pretty tight, right? So we already mentioned right off the bat that we are looking at our executives and going, hey, this is the type of people that we're going to be working with. Early stage tech founders, like, early stage executives, right? people who are founding new companies, right? Like that's really who we focus on, and we try and understand the challenges and the needs of those people in particular, right? And so it goes all the way back to the recruitment process. So we're doing social media screens. We're doing playbook tests. So we take mock examples that we've pulled from many executives to say, hey, these are the type of things you're going to be doing. We've put them through that screening process with high rigor very, very early in the process. All kinds of financial background checks. We basically run the entire gamut of checks in the Philippines that are available to us. And then we use a very, very discerning process to get that eliminated. So our credibility in the Philippines has grown exponentially. We're attracting about 3,000 applications per week right now. That
is insane. For how many?
We just have the one post, right? We do about 50 or so matches that we are trying to maintain to. We're actually trying to keep it low. Believe it or not, our growth is too crazy. But 50 is the target that we had set, even though we've exceeded that quite a bit. And we get about 3,000 per week. So we go through that whole list of folks. There's a big automated upfront process, and then we convert it into a manual process towards the end. Where we do over video call, but with a person to, make sure everything matches, right? And then once we even get to that process, then on top of that, we allow the executive to choose the person as well based on a video presentation of that person. So we coach and guide them. Hey, this is the job. This is the way it works. This is the way it looks. Talk about yourself. Talk about your feel, who you are, how you work with your community, what your life situation is, right? And then we put those videos in front of the folks at the front of the wait list to say, hey, here are the folks that we've screened. We've already gone through 3,000 applications or so to get to this person, right? We think that they're an absolutely great match. Do you feel? And then the client at that point makes the decision. Now there's a bonded start. I chose them. There's that match that gets made. There's a commitment and trust that can get built. And so that process then shuttles off, and then we have onboarding and all sorts of other processes that Chris can illuminate on. But right before we get to that process, like that matching process, Chris dives in on like a ton of different training modules, which I'm sure you can highlight at least one or two.
Well, and it's interesting to hear that, because my perspective from the client side is that like my hand was held for maybe a month, at least a couple weeks on the way towards that. That's kind of like, hey, in order to effectively work with your EA, here's what your expectations need to be. Here are the tools that you need to have in place. Here are the mindset shifts that maybe you need to think about. Here's how much time it's going to take in the first weeks to onboard. Like I had never worked with an EA before when I joined Athena, and I was like, there's a high chance that I just suck at this for a meaningful period of time, and I don't know how to get better at it without spending way more time than I needed a coach. And like, that was the experience for me. It was like a scaled version of like, hey, we're going to like coach you through and just kind of like fail proof this new adventure for you as like a client coming in, while you're kind of like upskilling and filtering on the EA
that's where
side.
We want to specialize too, right? Because, Chris was talking about it the other day when we were diving in a bit, that folks who have had EAs before successfully are really not the best demographic for us. Like that's not necessarily what we're trying to go after. What we're trying to go after is really those executives who are starting. They could have failed a number of times before. We find great success in those situations because they try the cheaper services or the per piece services and it doesn't work out. Get a lot of folks like that. Yeah. And then we can guide from there. Right. So that's kind of the niche that we target. That's where we think we offer the most value. And that's what we want to continue to focus on as time progresses.
Chris, you want to talk about some of the kind of last mile like tool and playbook training that they go through?
And this is all with the caveat that we're like very much still in build mode here. So if you, and Robert actually brought up a good point to frame this, right? Our competitors, for the most part, or the other people in market where, Robert said you send a task across the world and it comes back complete, right? I think a huge portion of, different companies that are trying to solve this problem, they're trying to do as much as possible to take the human element out of it as much as possible, right? They're trying to Mechanical Turk everything, and they're trying to maybe pool a bunch of tasks together from a whole bunch of different people and then get them done on a very transactional basis. And so for us to differentiate and for us to live the mission essentially that we're trying to achieve, which is, provide incredible career opportunity on one side, provide incredible leverage on the other side, and put those two things together, we focus a lot more on actually our perspective on the way that certain things should be done. And so all of our training modules start with a perspective. And so I'll conceptualize that with an example. And one of those examples is, what is our perspective on calendar management, right? Calendar management, we have certain perspective on how executives or how someone that's really busy should manage their time, right? And a lot of it is around how does an executive's energy levels wane, there's a sine wave of your energy levels throughout the day. And so our perspective piece on calendar management is, understanding with your principal, right? Your principal is the client on the executive side, right? The executive assistant, we ask them, make sure you understand with your principal the energy levels of your client. Like, are they an early morning person? Are they a late night person? Are they someone that thrives with asynchronicity, right? Do they need to be synchronous, right? For as an example, I'm trying to do things a little bit more asynchronous just to play around with it. Whereas like Jonathan loves like leaving me voice notes and leaving me Loom videos and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like really trying to get to a good sense of it and really trying to figure out a way to integrate that a little bit more into my life. There's some people that, or some executives, for instance, that love having an opportunity to compose themselves before a meeting, right? So it's like, don't book your principal in back-to-back meetings if they like to have a moment to catch their breath and like they hate being late for things, and make sure that they've got their energy level still up. Whereas other people love being back-to-back and they're like, I'm such a waste of time to like be in a meeting and then 15 minutes and then in another meeting and then 15 minutes, then in another meeting, because they feel like there is this huge switching cost that they don't want to be in, right? They want to have a chunk of meetings all back to back, so they don't have that context switching cost. And on that note, like context switching is extremely painful, right? Context switching is extremely painful for everyone. And so in our perspective, right, it's like try to organize your client's calendar in a way where they're doing as little context switching as possible. Now, what does that mean? Because that's, a foreign term to a lot of people, right? It's make sure that, like things are grouped so that there's less context switching. Make sure that, if you have a meeting with someone that is, directly relevant to someone else on your team, for instance, that comes, and so what we're essentially trying to do is we're trying to get our executive assistants trained up in a way that the thought process behind actual calendar management comes from an actual perspective or a point of view, as opposed to just, this is how you use Google Calendar, make sure that, and so that's like the basis of a lot of our playbooks, is that we have a white paper, and a white paper just means a perspective piece essentially. So we write our Athena perspective on how something should be done. And then there's two components to it: an instructional module that goes into our learning management system, and EAs go through essentially like an academy. We call it the Athena Academy. And watch those videos and, learn and do quizzes and all that kind of stuff to figure out, did I understand, did I actually like capture this material? And then we have playbooks, and the playbooks are very much in their fledgling state. And we're experimenting actually in beta with a lot of people around how to actually customize these playbooks to make them like, instead of just Athena's version of the playbook, it's Eric's version of the playbook. And one of the really exciting things around this is this concept of everyone in the world should have a user manual for themselves, right? And so that's like really what we're building right now, and it's very fledgling. And if there are other Athena, I'm sure I'm gonna die for this, because Athena clients are gonna be like, I heard you on Eric's podcast, and I want to know about my user manual. But we're building it, and it's gonna be epic, and it's gonna be incredible. And it's this concept of everyone has a user guide, and other people can learn how to work with you. And it sounds like a little bit egocentric, but like you can be the center of your own universe, and you can teach people how to work with you and how to work around you and how to help you live the life that you want to live, and that's your prerogative, right? And so that's what the client playbooks are becoming, and it's very exciting.
It is all. I mean, I sat in on some of those training sessions when I was over there, and it seriously looks like probably the training that you went through when you were new at Deloitte. It's like, here's how you pull in data, analyze, like construct an actual graph. Here's how you communicate a proposed decision with data at the back. Like it is, it's an amazing education, like upskilling all these EAs and showing them in context how to make decisions on behalf of their client, or at least propose them is incredible. Can you tell us what some of the playbooks are? Because I feel like that is exciting. When I hear, like, we talked about a fair bit about like how each of you use your assistants, or like, you know, what systems you've come up with, and then we kind of like share these playbooks, and it's like, oh no, like Chris has this like recipe kitchen grocery thing figured out. I want to have that figured out. Like show me how you solved it. Like, let me have that playbook.
I'll give you the structure, and the structure is kind of a life map type of structure that we're going through right now. And if you think about your life in different pillars of your life, right? I think almost everyone would agree with you that health is one of the pillars of your life, right? And you can break down health into, exercise, diet, and sleep. And so we're building out playbooks around, for an instance, diet is one, right? It's, hey, I'm your principal or your client wants to cook more at home. That's a really common one that we get, right? Why do you want to cook more at home? Well, because there's so many amazing reasons to cook more at home. You can eat healthier. You can spend more time with your significant other or with your family. And it's, another tool in your arsenal of living a beautiful life, honestly, right? If you can nourish yourself and nourish your loved ones. And so of course it's a common request, right? But what are the hard things about cooking for yourself? If you're running a fledgling company, or you're, let's be honest, like if you're a high powered executive of some sort that has an executive assistant, you're probably really fucking busy. And so you probably often, order out or eat out substantially more than you would otherwise want to. And so one of the things that an executive assistant can help you with, and this is one of the instructional modules that we're going through and we're teaching our executive assistants about, is how do you take as much of the cognitive load of cooking at home away from your principal? The cognitive load, a lot of that cognitive load is you have to decide what you're going to eat. You have to decide on what that recipe is. You have to make sure that those ingredients are fresh and at your house. And you have to make sure that you have the time and are with the right people and have the right amount of stuff. And, there's a whole bunch of cognitive load that goes into planning that, again, I talked about it earlier, that daily administration of your life or that weekly administration of your life, that falls into it, is cooking that meal. And so one of the instructional modules that we're building out, and it's getting more and more advanced because it's so contextual, is this idea of, right now we're getting to a pretty, Melissa is my wonderful wife. And she and I, shout out to Mel.
Shout out to
she
Mel.
She and I are getting to this awesome place with our executive assistants, where Mel will kind of decide on a couple of things. Say, hey, we're going to cook 4 times this week. Here are the 4 things we're going to cook. Send them off to Zan, who is her executive assistant, and then all of everything that we need with the right amounts of what we need arrives at our doorstep. Now, the first couple times we tried this, obviously was super painful because some of the it was not the right brands or not the right amount of stuff, or seriously,
9 bottles of red wine vinegar.
Right? There's cultural differences, there's contextual differences. So the first couple times we tried this, it didn't work out very well, but we just stuck at it and stuck at it and stuck at it, and now it's freaking amazing. It's actually amazing.
And it's like that. It's like that second hour that Robert talked about. Like if your expectations are set that this is only going to take 15 minutes to delegate.
It's funny you say that too, Chris, because I have my wife has a big case of baby wipes in the garage because we were doing the same thing with diapers and a lot of the repetitive tasks, right? So one day we just got this huge case of baby wipes. We're set for life. So, but it's a small price to pay for not having to ever think about that ever again, right? I mean, it
is. You have to make different trade-offs. Like I find myself I'm like, oh, this is so wasteful. And then I'm like, we got an extra head of lettuce. What is that?
Yep.
$3. Yep. We'll give it to our neighbor. Like this was absolutely within the acceptable margin of error of it's not like this is a failed experiment.
You can't be afraid to fail, right? You gotta own it, right?
Yeah. What are the single most exciting or most biggest moments of relief or whatever, like of single things that you guys have used your EAs for. I know for me, like there's definitely bigger projects that Ivan has done, but like anytime I can have him call customer service on my behalf, there is no greater joy in my life than, I hate phone trees more than anything else in the world. And like Ivan, before he worked with me, he worked in an AT&T call center. He was like a call trainer. And so like knowing that I'm like sending like a trained assassin into the call center ecosystem, that he knows how to work the system and can like get that stuff done for me, is just, it gives me such elation. Is there anything else that like you guys do that makes you that happy?
I'll use two examples. One that seems small, but I think it really does matter in the grand scheme of things. It's stuff that you don't ask for, that you don't expect, that happens like and surprises you. Right. So like once you have this EA relationship built, there's that tough period, then you get a bond built, then the things that you ask for are getting done. But then after you've had this EA relationship for a long period of time, then stuff starts to happen that you didn't even ask for that you love. Right. So a good point was when I was over in the Philippines, I was traveling through the Philippines for work, and then I was going back to Thailand to meet my family. And I had a stopover at the hotel, and I had like maybe 4 or 5 hours. Booked a massage for me, happened, didn't even think about it, just proactive. Yeah, you had long travel, you were on a long flight, you know, it would have been great to relax. And I was just that kind of like somebody like doing that for you, just, it makes a world of difference when you're in those kind of spots, right? After a long day of travel. The other one was save my other company. So I have a construction company that I founded with a friend of mine here on the island. And what we found out that there was government has to post for projects, right? So there's a lot of these websites that, you know, particularly for the provincial government here in Canada. And so we would basically bid and all this. And so our EA just started bidding on pretty much every project possible that we could find using a set criteria that we had kind of built out, right? And when you can have that kind of like machine going, right, which here in Canada would be so difficult to have that kind of a machine built, right? But when you've got remote support, right, you have that machine built, you can put lots of these bids in using data that's readily available, and you can just keep going. We've had like $250,000 contract wins just because of that process. And so from a cash flow perspective for the business, even if sometimes the profitability might be off by a little bit, right? You keep rolling, right? You keep moving into more and more projects, building credibility, right? And so it's things like that I never would have expected that really, you know, turned into an absolutely huge win just because you start to open yourself up to the possibilities of these other techniques as well, right? So,
yeah, and I think one of the things that I didn't expect, right? Because this is not tactical. This is literally just peace of mind, I suppose. But before I had my executive assistant, sometimes it's scary to sit down and do work for, you know, if you get into like a really amazing flow and you get into that flow state and like it's so amazing because you feel so productive and you're like, fuck, I put in a good day's work and like I'm going to sleep like a baby. Right. And you can like actually sit there and like work for like 10 hours in a row. And, you know, for me, sometimes like if I get into a real flow state, you can go for like 16 hours in a row. And like, it's like kind of weird and not everyone will do that. But I'm sure everyone has experienced that flow state before. Right. And especially if you're a high performer, you've probably experienced that flow state before. Having an executive assistant has given me way more of that flow state, not because of anything she's actually done or how strong she is necessarily, but because I know that someone's watching my email and I know that someone has got my back on emergencies. So I don't feel like I need to go and check and interrupt that flow state. And so that is like a huge under, we don't even really talk about that with anyone. And, maybe we should actually, maybe that's my fault. Maybe I should be telling more people about that because it's actually this like incredible feeling that someone has your back, that someone's watching out for things that might come in that they can take care of. Because almost nothing is like you need to be reachable at all times, right? Maybe you can put on your emergency ringer or whatever it may be, but it's really, to me, just a special part of having an executive assistant or having someone that you can trust watching out for you is getting into those flow states.
How when you talk to somebody who's a prospective client, how does someone know when they need an EA, when they're like ready for that in their career, or what the like how to kind of look at the opportunity cost of, because I think the cost of this is lower than people think, or would imagine. I mean, certainly it's not the equivalent of like of effort or cost of doing this in the US, where you're like, oh, I have to take on like a $50,000 a year expense, plus I have to figure out the overhead and how to manage payroll, and like, wait, do I owe this person benefits? Like, all of the overhead around that. So what is kind of the tipping point of like, this is a no-brainer if, you know, these either life circumstances or professional circumstances or, you know, hourly rate, however you want to
I'm gonna
classify it.
No, it's not financial
advice
at all, but I will have I'll have an answer that is going to maybe sound a little bit snarky, but is really like what I actually believe. And that is, once you reach a level of comfort with yourself, around how you want things done and how you're going to do things, you're ready for an executive assistant. If it economically makes sense in terms of, you know, outsourcing some part of your own responsibilities, the place where we see the people not have success is if they can't articulate what they want, or they can't articulate how they feel about things. And that's why we see the people that are most ready to have an executive assistant are system thinkers of some sort, right? They have a system, or they have an SOP, a standard operating procedure for how they believe that things are going to get done. There are two other things that are essential. One is that the person needs to have an understanding of their locus of control. And when I say locus of control, what I mean is like how comfortable people are giving up a little bit of agency. And then also, how comfortable are people with something that is not 100% the way that they themselves would do it. And so it's kind of like a perfectionist score of some sort, because we do see some clients come in and dramatically fail with us, right? I'm not going to pretend that we're perfect. We see some clients come in and dramatically fail with us because they either can't give up the agency that they need to effectively work with an executive assistant, or they're not comfortable with any type of quality drop off in something that gets done. And the way that I'll describe that is that, imagine it was me and you, Eric. Imagine I was your executive assistant, right? Imagine I was your chief of staff, and I was the chief of staff. Even if you're telling me, and we share a lot of context, right? We're both entrepreneurial, relatively young men in the context of everything. We share a ton of context. I probably know how you like certain things. We're not like super close friends or anything like that, but I probably have a really good sense of how you like things and what you would want done. And even if you tell me to do something, I'm not going to do it 100% the way that you would want to do it. I'm not going to understand 100% of your full intention, right? And you're going to have less agency than if you did it yourself, right? And now take that with an executive assistant. Then again, there's a socioeconomic divide, there's an international divide, there's sometimes a gender divide as well, right? Correct.
Cultural,
and so
contextual, yeah.
When a person is ready to have an executive assistant, they have to be at a certain level of comfort with themselves. They have to have a certain level of sophistication in the way that they're thinking, and they have to be able to understand at least where they're going to struggle, giving up some control, giving up some agency, because the implicit trade-off that you make with delegation is you might not get 100% of exactly what you meant across, and you might not get 100% control of what you're doing, but you get every second of the time back, right?
Yeah. And if you have, I remember kind of doing the napkin math of like, here's what I kind of think my time is worth, like professionally. Here's what I kind of think my like leisure time is worth personally. And it's something we talk about in the course all the time. And then I kind of did the math on like, even if Athena's hours are half as effective, this is a 10x like ROI instantly. And I'm sure it's going to be better than that. But like the margin of error of like getting a positive outcome of this, if you are in the, like I've seen somebody else drop a rule of like, which is a nice clean rule, and I don't know if it's quite true. I think there's more lifestyle to it than that. But if you make more than $100,000 a year, you should have an EA. Or like if you have more than 2 kids, you should have an EA. Or like if both husband and spouse work, you should have an EA. Like I'm sure it's not quite as easy to cut and dry like that.
From my perspective, this is how I think about it. Maybe this is wrong, but this is the way I thought about it from when I first did it to as I continue to do it. Are you ready to found the corporation of you? Right? Are you entrepreneurial enough to found the corporation of you? And do you believe in yourself enough that you know that your output is going to gain? Right? And so like delegation is an interesting word because it usually has a negative connotation. People think of like, these shows with, the secretaries and the old school style, right? But really what you're doing is you're hiring an employee into the corporation of you, right? And so, I see so much opportunity for consulting work, so much opportunity to get on boards, so much opportunity, to share what your true expertise is about, right? That you waste time on buying Amazon, doing calendars, like doing very ineffectual work. Like if you were looking at yourself as a corporation, as a business, that would be a terrible decision to diversify into a completely different stream that makes no sense and that you don't have the skill in, right? So I always, I would ask the question to the client, are you ready to invest in the corporation of you? Is that a bet you're willing to make? Is that an investment that's going to have an ROI? And if you can answer that question, then I think the interesting thing that comes next is the same people who, if they are willing to make that investment, they need to understand that this is an employee that they're bringing on. And that means they need to be humble, listen to them, coach them, develop them, do all the things that a good boss would do with an employee as well. And then tremendous benefits are going to come from it. You look at these entrepreneurs that are founding huge companies with 50,000 employees. Nobody questions that those companies need to have a ton of employees in order to gain leverage. But for some reason, when it becomes a personal thing, all of a sudden the context of the conversation changes a lot, right? So I think if you frame it that way, I think it starts to mean like, hey, wait a minute, I just need to treat me like I'm a company, right?
Yeah, and I love the way that's articulated because you start to feel, when you feel constrained, when you feel like there's more of you to give than you can afford to, but you can't afford to let anything fall off the plate, but you don't know what resource to kind of reach for, right? Like that classic kind of trap of like, I only think of leverage in one way. I haven't considered, hiring an EA was one of the two biggest jumps in the personal leverage that I felt in my whole life. And that it was one of the things that just clicked into like, oh my God, like, and unlocked this whole new level of compounding, like reinvesting the gains from that step back into more projects and more effectiveness and more impact. So yeah,
well,
I think
and when you see some of these people who are accomplishing the most in the world, right? I mean, pick your person who's got the most leverage, right, in this whole planet. I don't think anybody would argue the fact that they have a massive family office behind them, right? It's not talked about, but they do, right? And every once in a while, a story comes out, but a lot of those folks are under such like extreme NDAs, right? That it's clear that the amount of leverage that they get because of those huge family offices they have behind them is exponential. So it feels to me like if leverage is the goal, right? If output is the goal, then having the teamwork behind you to achieve those goals is an absolute necessity, right? And fighting it is fighting your goals, right?
Yeah, it's something you should be running towards, not shying away from. I always think as you described that, I'm picturing like a scene of Succession where there's like the main characters and then there's just a bunch of people around them with like clipboards that you don't even know their names. It's just like a staple of that. But even, every book you've ever read, like there's one big name on the front. And when you flip to the back, you see 50 names that contributed to that person's life and this book in particular. And, there's a lot of leverage and nobody wants to shine a spotlight on how they're accomplishing what they are. But this is, I think, one of the
they ask the question all the time, like, how do you do all these different things, right? And the answer is never, oh, I have 50 people behind me that do a lot of those things, right? It's
and to that point, I hope, Robert, it's fair to say, like,
oh yes,
you have more than one EA.
I have a team for sure. So.
What is a team? What does a team look like? How does it work?
And she's been working with me for about 7 years now. So she's been with me for a long time.
Wow.
And then I have kind of two for time zone coverage that sit underneath her. And so they're kind of like my hands-on folks that kind of follow me 24/7. We divide some tasks based on expertise or skills, right? So there's certain parts of my life that go to one or the other if it's not a time zone sensitive issue. But we have, that team basically focused on like following as I spit out tasks from construction company, Athena, or investments, or whatever the case may be. And then the construction company has a number of folks that are inside of it. So there's like a master person for the construction company. Spend some time with me, but more time with the other founder, being kind of the main liaison for that company. And then, we do regular cadences of meetings and different communication methods, to kind of go back and forth and communicate on things. So we do use the Athena app as kind of a primary tool for me to delegate. So, if I'm on the fly, I'll record something into the app. The app goes to my chief of staff, and then she can delegate the task in Asana to different folks. I mean, they have access to do it as well, but that's her primary job responsibility. And then if I wanted to communicate with them, I generally do that through Signal in a group chat. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's literally a small business.
Yeah. And
or two.
It's funny because it makes money, right? So, I mean, it's ridiculous. But I told the story about the winning the bids for the construction company, right? But setting up consulting, like getting on the boards of certain companies, right? Advisory roles, right? Like all these things are possible because a lot of the other stuff that I would before spend a lot of time on, I don't have to do that. And so I'm much more open to opportunities because, I'm not wasting and I don't feel so busy that I'm not going to entertain them, right? So it's just a refocus of, where I'm actually good versus where I'm not. And then on the back end of it, I think it's really important what you guys were saying before about the weaknesses, right? The weaknesses that you have, those are probably the areas where you can benefit the most. And I'll give an example because I think it helps in the context of these. Like if you're the type of person who I'll get to the dentist eventually, I'll get there, right? But you just kind of keep putting it off and then, it turns into a disaster, right? If you have an assistant who's good at that stuff and knows that that's a priority for you, all that stuff happens and you don't have to worry about it, right? And so what's the benefit of not putting that stuff off, right? It's
having teeth.
It's funny, but it's so true. And I don't know what it is for every person. I'm sure every person has a thing. I tease Chris about his haircuts, because he does.
Oh, he gets daily haircuts. That looks like it was shaved this morning. That's fresh.
But he was doing it himself, so I was teasing him about it. But you get the point, right? It's like these things that otherwise you wouldn't think about that oftentimes frustrate you that you just dismiss it within a few seconds. When that just gets offloaded, like Chris said, it gives you the peace of mind, but also it protects you against things long term that could hurt you as well, right? So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Chris, you want to give us your version of that? I know you and your wife both have your own EAs, which kind of help you both at work
exactly. And
at home.
It just like any team, right? Like people fall into their own roles, and Sam is my EA, and Zan is Mel's EA, and we do have these kind of family office meetings where we talk about what our priorities are, what's going to be important to us coming up, what the next quarter looks like. We talk a little bit about some of the things that need to get coordinated. Actually, something that has been really cool and really exciting for us is that we just tore down a house and designed it and built it up together over the course of the last year. And so the EAs were pretty intrinsically involved in that. We're doing some landscaping now. So there's literally, I was a little bit worried because we're recording this and I wanted to be professional audio quality, but there are people in the back. So hopefully I'm secluded enough. There are people in the back just essentially jackhammering the patio back there. But the all that to say, we have the family office that coordinates the daily administration of your life, making sure that the kind of the bird's eye view of what the calendar is going to look like. When are we going to see my family this summer? when are we going to see Mel's family this summer? What are the big things that are coming up? Like, when were we traveling, and when are we going to be able to see, person X, Y, and Z? And so just having a team coordinate your life when you get to a certain level of, how busy you're going to be. And again, once you're living a life that's intentional enough that you understand and you can be articulate about what you want to see happen, that's the time when having an executive assistant is just actually gives you real leverage, right? They're able to help coordinate the life that Mel and I are trying to build for ourselves, which is, again, that's the superpower.
I love that. So where, I think we started this, we did the first half of this answer, but not the second half. But that's okay. We can pick up where Athena is today now after a year of Robert's hard work and a good portion of Chris's. And then, I'd love to see a little bit of like what you see this going over the next 10 years, like what the idealized vision of Athena can be in the 2030s.
Where we're at today, we've got around 500 partnerships now. We started a year ago when I came on board. We probably had around 70, and many of them were part-time or kind of mixed relationships at the time. So today it's around 500.
Not a lot of businesses that grow 10x in a year.
It's been some crazy growth for sure, and the demand is there, right? I mean, so that's why we're so lucky, is because the demand for these type of relationships is very much there. And it's whenever we do these podcasts, I have a conversation with Chris. I go, Chris, are you sure we should do this, right? Because there's a lot of demand to get these kind of relationships, and and they're hard to build, right? They take a lot of focus and a lot of really great people. Mm-hmm. We've been on a hiring spree, bringing on really talented people like Chris and many, many others. We brought on a new chief marketing officer, a new chief financial officer. So really trying to formalize the company, build a lot of really strong practices. And that's what we're in right now. We're in build and invest mode. And where do we get to? We had talked in an original forecast that getting to an employee size of 10,000 people was the target for 2030. I guess I'm not as focused on that as I am creating really high quality relationships. I do want to get to a place where I continue to find new opportunities in other economically disenfranchised parts of the world, not just the Philippines. From an objective standpoint, if we can continue to have a high quality relationship between the EAs and the clients, we can leverage the playbooks and our applications to kind of help make that communication flow back and forth between the two of them very, very seamless. And at the end of the day, treat our people really great. I think I'd be satisfied. From a market standpoint, it seems like we're in an opposite situation to a lot of companies where the demand for the product is very, very high. So we're being very careful about how we approach. But ultimately, if we do get to a place where we find we can supply those high quality relationships with folks and help people while doing it, we'd like to continue to look outside of our current target demographic, which is simply just early stage founders, entrepreneurs, tech business owners. Chris, you want to add anything to that that I missed?
Yeah, well, I want to jump in with a reiteration a little bit of part of why I joined the company, right? Because the vision, or the long-term vision for me, is that Athena at some point in the future can claim and can, proudly claim, and rightfully so claim, that we provide, we source and find and create these relationships, and that we produce the best executive assistants in the world, right? That Athena produces the best executive assistants in the world. And I think there's no reason that we can't become that company. And I also think that we have this opportunity to do this incredible good, because, and some people get really, it's like controversial to say that some people are, more impactful than others. Right. And I know that the reality is I'll take that stance, and we'll just say it, is that there are certain people in the world that are going to do a crazy amount, that are going to be insanely productive and are going to do a crazy amount of good and are going to march us forward and be insanely productive no matter what they do. And if that is our client base, and our sole mission as a company is to take the people that are doing the most in the world already and give them leverage to help them do more, and sometimes up to 10, 20, 30 times more than they thought that they could do, because we teach them how to delegate appropriately. We teach them how to, let everything else fall away from them. And we can do that while producing the best executive assistants in the world and giving people, exactly like what Robert said, from economically disenfranchised places in the world, and connecting them to these people and letting them be the right-hand person and changing their families' lives and their entire trajectory in life. That is that's the whole reason I joined. It's unbelievably exciting to me. And you have this opportunity to do this incredible good on both sides. And that's what I want us to become.
I love that. That is such, this company's vision and mission, strikes a chord deep within me on both sides of the vision. And everybody that I've met, you guys were, generous enough to invite me to come to the Philippines and hang with you and meet all the EAs and be kind of a part of the family for a week or so. And the hunch that I had that was true just kind of kept becoming more obvious and more clear. There's magic in leverage, and there's magic in elevating people and finding extreme talent, especially when they're contextually in a disadvantage, and putting those things together. And I've seen just alchemy magic happen already, even at what is a relatively small scale compared to where I think we will get in the future. And I'm just really excited to see what happens as you guys keep adding zeros and adding playbooks and finding new countries, new people, new clients, and seeing where we go from here. But yeah, it is almost unbelievable that you guys independently arrived at such a similar worldview and set of values and things to be excited about that I did, and we just kind of met in the middle, and Spider-Man pointed at each other, and we're like, oh my god, this is great. Yeah. I'm not alone.
You gotta put the meme up now then, right? And
yes, we will end with the meme. Yeah. Where do you guys, just from an economics perspective, what is going to happen in 100 or 200 years? Is the whole world going to end up getting totally flattened out? Will these local sort of disadvantages, will that trend just continue over decades and decades until the world is truly flat?
And when you say flat, you mean in the way just equal,
Yeah, I mean, will the global average be this pay be the same as the sort of local average pay?
It's interesting to see kind of what's happening, because it feels that way, right? I mean, the Philippines, when I first got there in 2008, it was just a very different, very, very different world than it is today, right? I mean, it's the amount of change, entire cities have been raised there kind of in the last 5 years. Where I used to live basically was non-existent, and 5 years later. And when you kind of go there, you kind of get stunned, because the skyscrapers are happening and everything's really, really popping up, right? And people say that. People say, the Philippines was the early 2000s, and then it's gonna move downstream to the Vietnam or Africa or wherever, right? So I to some extent, I think it's a beautiful thing, because the middle class starts to exist in these countries where it just absolutely didn't. But how far away would that happen? Mm-hmm. My God. I mean, that's probably a long ways off, right? And, I would imagine technology is probably the great equalizer. And so the faster that technology gains, probably the tighter we get, and the more opportunities can be leveraged, right? So that would be, I still think we're a ways off, because the more you travel to countries like those, the more gaps you see. It's illuminating.
Yep.
What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I think it's a really big question. I think that one of the things I said earlier on the pod was that you have to believe that everywhere in the world there's incredible people. To be an Athena client, that's one of the things you'd have to believe. And I do think that over the course of 100, 200, 300 years, and into the future, I'm firmly in the optimist camp. I know that being optimistic can sometimes, paint you as naive, but I would rather be, I guess I would rather be naive if being a pessimist is the only way to be seen as worldly enough. I do think that things are getting better all over the world in a variety of ways, and I do think that one of the beautiful things that will start to happen over the course of the next century is that if you have enough talent and you have enough drive, you're going to be able to find your way to a beautiful life. Whereas that might not have been true, over this past century. I think it will be true of the coming century, and so that I think is wonderful.
It's interesting too with technology because years ago people were saying all the jobs would go away because everything would become so easy. Right. And it kind of seems like we've seen the complete opposite, right? We've seen everything become ridiculously complex. Therefore, there's way more jobs needed and way more people needed than ever before. I wonder if there is a tipping point, at some stage where that kind of reverses, but it doesn't seem like it as of now, at least.
No, I mean, that debate is probably thousands of years old. Like, oh, we invented the plow. What are we going to do all day? Yeah. No, I'm a deep believer that, not only do pessimists not produce, but that continued technology is another form of leverage that just kind of continues to make everyone's lives better. And the more widely that gets distributed and the more widely opportunity gets distributed, and talent gets, I think leverage somewhat naturally accrues to the high impact sort of individuals that Chris was alluding to. We all choose to work for people that we think can use our talents the best. We invest in the people who we think are going to put that money to use the best and produce the greatest thing. So like there's a very natural sort of economy of leverage going on. And the more people are connected to it and the more fluid and meritocratic that becomes across the whole globe, the trickle down effects and the lifestyle improvements to everyone on the planet are meaningful. So I just think this is truly like a very meaningful kind of paddle in the water towards that effort. Actually, like there's not a lot of people in the frontiers of places like this with high intention, high talent, high integrity. I mean, Robert, you kind of mentioned at the beginning, like there's companies here, but it's not always for the right reasons and not always with the best intent and not always at the highest level.
One thing I'll jump in on that is that this is really cool. And I actually don't know if Robert knows this, but I meet with executive assistants a couple of times a week. So I usually try to meet with 2 new executive assistants a week. And I can't tell you the number of times that I said, how did you hear about Athena? Why did you apply? And they say, I heard that it was a Robert Hayes company, so I wanted to apply. And I was like, holy shit, this is fucking cool. Like this guy is like, and I know having worked with Robert for the past 8 months that he's an incredible leader, definitely the strongest leader I've ever worked with. And it's just, but to see that like that people are applying because they know it's a Robert Hayes company, like that's a special feeling as well.
Thank you. That's nice to see.
Go for that rewrite, like Athena, a Robert Hayes joint, or like
cool.
Hayes EAs.
It's just I think if you believe deep down that both people can win in any engagement, I mean, I think it just changes the whole context, yep. Right? So I said it earlier about the whole 1980s like philosophy, or a lot of companies quarter to quarter driving profits, at the expense of everything else. I continue to refuse to believe that it's not possible to have both parties win, right? And so when you have that kind of a belief, I mean, that's what we did at TaskUs for a long time, and it wasn't just me. Obviously, there was a lot of us involved in that, but we were able to show on a repeated basis that you can take care of your people and still make good money and still produce excellent results. And that's what we want to continue to do, right? And so, the market is full of different people out there offering, services, hiring, all that kind of stuff. And, at many times we've actually said to some of our clients, like, hey, this is not the option for you, right? Like I've told Chris many times, like, hey, no, that's not for us. Even though it's very lucrative, it's very profitable. He's come to me with some big opportunities where I've said, that's not what we do. That's not our value prop, right? That's not what we're going to be best at, right? So we're really trying to stick to the things that we think we can do amazingly. And that is kind of exactly what we've described here today. And that's going to be our absolute focus, right? And, they say companies are always defined by what they say no to, right? You can have all these fancy core values, all these fancy, websites, all this kind of stuff, but where you actually decide to draw the line. And that's why, with your onboarding too, Eric, like, no, it's a full-time thing, right? There's a training you got to go through, right? There's a selection criteria that we have to go through. We're starting to screen more folks, but that's not because that we want to exclude folks. It's because we want to make sure that our promise is kept, right? That our value proposition is kept. And oftentimes that means, explaining to folks where they're going to get the most benefit and where they're not. And that's why I said a lot of folks, they go try 2 or 3 other places and it doesn't work. Those make ideal clients for us because they understand the reason why. But folks who have had successful relationships in the past, it doesn't necessarily work best with us, just because that's not what we specialize in, right? So,
yeah. Just in that last sort of set of paragraphs, I heard 2 what sound like really strong or frequently used heuristics or mental models or priorities for you. Like you hit both on focus and win-win sort of alignment relationships. And I wonder, are those, what is the full set of sort of the heuristics that make you, you've done so much with Athena so quickly. You clearly have an impact, a reputation from TaskUs. Chris, who I respect, has a very large sample size and looks up to you as a leader and an operator. What are the mental tools or priorities or things that you use to guide the decisions most often that you feel sort of attribute, you would attribute that to?
Yeah, I'd say number 1 is actions and words, and the segregation of the 2 of them. I have a disadvantage, a natural disadvantage, which my natural disadvantage is I'm not a very emotionally based person. So I struggle with kind of being very emotional. But what it's caused me to do is to be very observational when it comes to people's behaviors and their actions and the words that they speak. And trying to separate the 2. So oftentimes when me and Chris are talking, and some of the examples he gave, where I tell him somebody on his team is going this direction, right, and then he says no, or something like that. Oftentimes, what it has to do is you just look at what they're doing, why they're doing it, right? Compare that to how they're speaking. If there's a contradiction. Experience has just taught me to really watch the contradictions, and then it becomes somewhat predictive of next behavior, right? And like I said, the experience of being able to kind of go through painful terminations, to be able to go through deep performance issues, to be able to go dealing with, heavy-handed relationship issues in a peer environment, right? A lot of these kind of very controversial relationships or personality types that I've hired before that had high expectations on. A lot of those situations, they become almost predictive. But I think the superpower would be very much separating the words from the actions and understanding the gap, as opposed to just looking at the complete picture and then trying to make a judgment what's based off what's been presented, right? So, that's where it becomes predictive, and that's where you get to a place where you can kind of see through the noise, I think, a little faster than folks who haven't had that experience yet, right? So,
super interesting. Chris, do you have similar heuristics on the client or operation side?
It's funny because I'll just comment on Robert for a second, because it's one of the hardest things to follow for anyone, I think, and for anyone that's younger or just learning to lead a larger org is, and I said this earlier on the pod as well, right? When to zoom in and zoom out. So it's one of the funniest things to me that, and everyone will know this, when sometimes the boss tells you something that you think you should understand, but you don't necessarily understand, is Robert's like, don't get too into the weeds on this, but know what's important. And it's okay, I'm going to try to figure out, what's important and what to actually zoom in on. And that's really hard. That's your whole job, right? As you get more latitude, as you get a wider breadth of your responsibilities, is figuring out what actually is important. And part of the hilarity of that is, of of course, you learn that over time because you start seeing the same patterns emerge, right? And you start seeing, okay, this is why this is going to be important. And you start to, and certain people will be, of course, better at than others. And, a lot of judgment is pattern recognition, right? So, but on the client side, or a lot of the, it's funny enough, but very similar to what Robert said, and mirrors actually what Robert said on the client side. Clients will lie to you all the time, meaningfully or not. They don't necessarily mean to lie to you, right? Yeah, it's okay.
Sorry.
I forgive you. They lie to themselves in onboarding a lot, right? About how they behave and how they're going to behave, and how much control they need and how much agency they need. They lie to themselves about how much work they actually have to do. And when I say lie, I don't mean it in a derogatory sense, and I don't mean it in a negative sense. I just mean that people tell themselves stories about themselves all the time, no matter how sophisticated you get, no matter how senior you get. And part of being part of being a great client experience org is understanding what a client actually needs and not what they're telling you that they need. I think that is the most important thing on the client side that I try to impart on our team is picking up and doing a lot of that pattern recognition. Like once you go through and see enough clients and they come through with their different problems and their different pain points, one of the things is actually, and this is actually a very common sales technique, right, is finding that person's pain and talking it back to them. You find that person's pain and you talk it back to them. If you can get them to feel that pain on a sales call, you can close them, right? We use that in a less salesy and aggressive way. We use that same tactic in client experience, where it's like, no matter what the client is telling you, really try to understand what their real pain is and like what they actually need and the type of person that they are, so that you can actually help them in the ways that they're going to need help. And so very similar, and it's surprising to me that. Well, it's not surprising, but a lot of it mirrors one another, right? It's you look at what the actions are and how the person is actually behaving is how you're going to help them.
An interesting thing with clients too that I think is worth a call out for folks who are debating this relationship or looking how to improve it is the clients that refuse to provide the negative feedback. Like that's the one that kind of stands out to me all the time, which is not providing feedback to the EA. So I don't know, Chris, if you want to highlight it a little bit, but I think it's worth noting just because we see it so often where if the EA actually misses expectations, screws something up royally, oftentimes we'll see people not even say anything. They're like, no, everything's good, right, Chris? Like how often does that happen? Like pretty often, right?
It's definitely one of the bigger stumbling points of clients. And it's funny to me because there's this, I don't know if I'm using this, there's kind of like this cognitive dissonance of like, because it's an executive assistant, it's like, I don't want to, either I'm tentative to get mad at them, or I don't understand necessarily how to give them feedback, because don't get me wrong, right? Our client base is, I'll use the word sophisticated, because they're leading companies. They're, for the most part, have managed people or teams before. And it's really, it's this kind of like mental block of, I'm not going to, and this is, I think, one of the things that's really interesting as well is, who do you give feedback to? Who do you care enough to give feedback to? Only the people that you like really want to invest in. And you're willing to put yourself in a certain amount of, discomfort to go ahead and give that hard feedback. But sometimes there's this mental block around, I don't want to give that person feedback because, sometimes it's because, you might not believe in that person, or because you don't want to invest in them, or because, I think a lot of it, and maybe Robert, this is what you were alluding to, but I think a lot of it comes back to that guilt of like, should I have an executive assistant in the first place? Which is, just like this whole thing that we have to really,
it's a two-sided thing, because they're guilty because they don't think they deserve the EA, but then they get one, but then they're guilty. They don't want to give critical feedback, right? But I call it out just because I think that's something that very much needs to be watched, right? Because oftentimes, I use this example with the EAs a lot when I talk to them. Is if the client, just gives you thumbs up all the time, says good thing, but doesn't leverage you very much, or you're not expanding the relationship, it's not taking on new tasks, right? It's basically what they're saying to you is like, yeah, it's okay. Like, and they start to walk away from the relationship. Even if they're not walking away, they can move them somewhere else, but not have that difficult feedback. And as a business owner, investing in your own business, like I mentioned earlier, I just think it's so important that they provide that feedback, good or bad, right? It's difficult to do, but extremely important to do so. And, I say to the team, I say, if you're a parent of a child, and I've got 3, and I love them to death, but the hardest person in the world on them is always going to be me, right? Because I want them to achieve great things, right? I want them to get to a place that, they're going to be happy and successful. And I think, to some extent, the clients, we've seen that trend in them quite a bit, that that's something that needs to be watched, right? Don't feel guilty for having an EA in the first place, and don't feel guilty if you have to give critical feedback.
Yeah, that Ivan was really good especially when we first started, about asking for feedback, reinforcing how much and I'm sure that's a result of your coaching, asking how much he wanted it, how much he benefited from it. The other thing that I think Athena is perhaps you maybe not give yourself enough credit for, is you're a neutral third party, and you seek feedback from us as clients continuously, that you then have a path to sort of feedback, and as part of a coaching package and a performance thing, and like a improvement system, where it's like, even if it's a survey or just a third party, or like, hey, how do I deliver this difficult feedback? It's not you and an EA just like alone in an awkward relationship where, you're like afraid to annoy them because they have actually a huge amount of access in your life. And it's this like whether it's really positive relationship, you don't want to give negative feedback, or a potentially like, oh my God, I'm afraid to offend them, like, version of that conversation. Like, both are hard for totally different reasons. And Athena addresses both from my perspective, which I think is I think
it's one of the things that you touched on that you might not have realized you touched on, is that, and I said this earlier in the pod too, but it's that your relationship with your EA is your most personal professional relationship you'll ever have. And so part of the other reason that folks have a hard time criticizing their EA is it feels like it's a very personal relationship, and it's almost like, when you have to give feedback to your wife or your husband, like, it's, hey, honey, I don't really like when you do that. That's, it's hard. It sounds kind of silly. But it's a very personal professional relationship, and a lot of it.
Everyone just got a little stomach ache when you started that sentence. You're like, oh, no.
Your EA is trying to emulate you, and they do these, sometimes do personal things for you, and it's such a personal relationship, and so it can be very awkward to give feedback, hard feedback or good feedback, and it is something where, and I'll take the analogy a step further. You say a neutral third party. A lot of our facilitated feedback sessions honestly mirror what I would imagine like a marriage counselor looks like in some ways, right? Where it's like, tell me how you feel, tell me how you feel, and making sure that is really how the relationship continues to evolve. And so that's what that's part of, what we try to do in some of those sessions as well.
Love it. Well, I'm so, every time we talk about this topic or anything else, I'm just like so grateful that there are people like you guys thinking so hard about this problem and working so hard on it. It has definitely changed my life for the better. And I have recommended Athena to many people already, and certainly will continue to. And I'm so excited to just kind of chip in on this journey and get a seat in the stands to kind of watch where it all goes. I love what you guys are working on. I love all of the EAs that I've met, and what a party Athena throws. Unbelievable.
You had a few drinks while you were there, did you, Eric?
Did you go to bed early?
You
did go to bed early.
When we were walking through the beach area there, it's like everybody's kind of grabbing us, trying to force drinks down your throat, right? It's
tough working conditions over there with the beach front when the Wi-Fi reaches the beach, and
It was great
And the
great
rum
to see
comes
the
in
happy
coconuts.
group. Great to see, such a group of people excited about what they're doing. Right. It was, absolutely great trip. And thank you so much for sharing your experience and motivating a lot of the EAs about like what the relationship can achieve over time. Right. So thank you so much for doing that for us as well. We appreciate it. We have that problem sometimes where we do meetings like this to talk about the client side of the relationship, right? But it also helps us so much when we can share the client side of the relationship with the EAs so they can get the perspective on what it's like to be a client and what it feels like to be on that side of the equation, right? It helps them do a better job overall, and I think helps expand our vision as we look to continue to grow many of these relationships around the world over the next few years.
Yeah, it's an incredibly exciting vision.
Big things to do.
Lots
to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you guys for taking a few hours out of your extremely busy and high leverage schedules to hang out with us. And I hope this has been impactful for everybody listening, and it brings them a little closer to feeling like they're ready to invest in the corporation of them.
Yeah, just reach out to Chris's email directly so that Sam can answer.
You should. You should. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We'll leave a link in the show notes. Thank you guys again so much for the life lessons and the personal lessons and the professional lessons. And it's been awesome to get a couple more hours.
Thank you, Eric.
I look forward to the next time.
It's been a blast.
Thank you so much, Eric. Yeah, been an absolute pleasure.